Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to start by acknowledging the land that we're on, the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And since today we're debating Bill C-35, the Canada Early Learning and Childcare Act, as we acknowledge the land we're on, it's important we acknowledge the ongoing injustice that Indigenous people face, pausing not only to remember and honor the Indigenous survivors who were impacted by residential schools and the children who never made it home, but we must also collectively commit to a future where there is justice for Indigenous people and where every child matters. And a piece of this is supporting Indigenous-led childcare programming, committing to a future where every child matters, where Indigenous children have the opportunity to experience high-quality, culturally rooted early learning and childcare programming. Bill C-35, the Canada Early Learning and Childcare Act, has been a long time coming. And I want to thank the childcare advocates who have worked tirelessly for decades to make this happen. And I say tirelessly because their advocacy has continued despite decades of broken promises. But it's also important to note that so many of the people who have been pushing for national child care, these are parents, grandparents, educators, they are tired. Parents have been struggling to afford the unbelievably high costs of childcare, paying monthly childcare fees that are as much or more than their monthly rent payments. And they have been struggling to find childcare spaces. They are struggling, and many parents, especially moms, have told me that they would like to return to work, but because of the impossibly high costs or because they can't find a space, it is impossible for them to return to their career. I've spoken with grandparents who are generously stepping in to provide care, but who have worked hard their whole lives. And while they're stepping up as much as they can, they are tired and they don't want to be full-time caregivers. I've spoken to educators who give so much to our children, and yet have for decades been underpaid and undervalued. Educators who are leaving the field because they can't afford to make ends meet without a living wage. Their stories highlight some of the reasons this piece of legislation is so important. I'm glad the current government is committing to funding, and we're beginning to see that funding make an impact in my home province of BC. The BC government has been reducing childcare costs, creating more spaces, recruiting more early childhood educators. And every parent and every child deserves access to high-quality, affordable childcare. This bill enshrines this vision into law and commits the federal government to long-term funding for provinces and Indigenous peoples. New Democrats pushed the government for this legislation. It's one of the 27 commitments outlined in the Supply and Confidence Agreement, and we were able to successfully push them for the prioritization of public nonprofit care, meaning affordable, high-quality, accessible daycares for families who need them, which ultimately means better wages and working conditions for staff. But also we pushed to make sure the bill would contribute to the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and for the inclusion of a commitment to the right to childcare as recognized in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I want to shout out to my colleague, the member from Winnipeg Centre, for her tireless work on this file. But there are also ways the bill could be further improved, and we will, as New Democrats, be supporting the bill, but also working alongside childcare advocates, educators, unions, and other experts in the field to strengthen it at committee. We know that one of the major barriers to the expansion of affordable childcare is staffing. We've been echoing the calls from unions who represent childcare workers, calling for a workforce strategy that addresses staffing shortages in the sector. Early childhood educators in Canada continue to leave the profession due to the low pay, the lack of benefits, the lack of supports, the lack of decent working conditions. And enticing new people into a field when they're facing these conditions is extremely challenging. The federal government must take a leadership role, commit to a workforce strategy, and support amendments to this bill that outline explicit commitments to fair pay and decent working conditions for staff. CUPE, my union before I became an MP, and also the union that represents over 12,000 workers in the childcare sector, they've stated clearly that until the childcare staffing crisis is resolved, the promise of affordable, high-quality childcare for every family in Canada who needs it will remain unfulfilled. They are constantly advocating for their members, reminding us that childcare workers are highly skilled, trained individuals. Their work is important. These are the people who are caring for and educating our children. They deserve respect and fair wages. We'll continue to push for a more unequivocal commitment in this bill to decent work for childcare staff. We need clearer language that explicitly mentions fair wages and working conditions. We're also going to be pushing for stronger reporting requirements. The current language in the bill has a vague promise that the minister will report on progress, but there should be requirements to report on the number of new spaces built, the number of new childcare workers being hired, and a detailed breakdown of federal spending. We'll also be pushing for stronger accountability mechanisms to ensure the provinces are spending childcare money for its intended purpose. This is particularly relevant when we see in Manitoba the average cost of childcare not going down. And in Ontario, we see Ontario opening the door to and prioritizing the expansion of for-profit care. So our New Democrat team is putting forward constructive proposals to improve the accountability and reporting mechanisms in the bill to ensure costs are reduced, childcare spaces are created, and child care workers are being hired. But we're also pushing for a workforce strategy and a clear commitment to decent working conditions and fair pay for staff. A study that was released last year by the Child Care Resource and Research Unit provides the do's and don'ts when building a universal child care program. The researchers draw on studies both in Canada and internationally, and they conclude, based on the best available evidence, and on all we know about building the foundations for a publicly funded universal childcare system, the best way for Canada to build an affordable, accessible, inclusive, flexible, equitable, and quality early child learning and childcare system is to use our public funds to prioritize nonprofit and public childcare. That's not to say that we ignore or exclude the current for-profit childcare providers, but instead they argue that the most constructive way forward is a three-point plan. First, maintain funding and maintain the existing supply of regulated public, nonprofit, and for-profit childcare. Second, ensure more vigorous publicly managed regulation, including affordable provincial parent fees and wage scales that ensure decent staff compensation. And third, that any future public funds aimed at the expansion of the supply of childcare should prioritize public and nonprofit providers, while simultaneously pursuing new public strategies for developing early learning and childcare services when, where, and for whom they are needed. This is the roadmap to a national childcare system that provides parents, children, and educators with the support that they need. And I want to end with a few comments about the gendered impacts of our policy decisions. We know that a national system of affordable childcare helps advance gender equality by making it easier for women to re-enter the workforce after having children on their own terms. Unpaid household and family childcare responsibilities disproportionately fall on women, and investing in affordable, accessible, and inclusive childcare is essential if we want women to have equal opportunities. But it's important to note that there is little data on the particular challenges faced by racialized women in accessing childcare. If we want to ensure that the most marginalized women do not slip through the cracks of a new childcare system, it's essential that we bring the voices of underrepresented women and gender diverse people to the forefront of these policy discussions. It's also important to remember that the childcare sector professionally is one of the most feminized job sectors in Canada, and early childhood educators are some of the most undervalued workers with low pay, low retention rates, low levels of job satisfaction, and unsurprisingly, labor shortages. Investing in affordable, accessible, high-quality childcare where childcare providers are paid a fair wage is good for gender equality, good for the economy, and it's good for our children. Let's make a more prosperous, equitable, affordable, and inclusive Canada for all. Thank you.